My parents think that using their anniversary party to force me to pay off their debts was a good idea. But a judge thinks taking away their house is even better. Recently, my parents organized a big celebration for their 30th wedding anniversary, because according to them, they'd never had a proper celebration before. They claimed their wedding had been just a small gathering they organized themselves. Maybe they're exaggerating, maybe not. I thought it would be a normal celebration, full of fun, maybe some alcohol. Well, I was wrong about the fun part. The alcohol part, however, was another story. My mom and dad took the opportunity to insult and scold me in front of family and friends. Maybe it was the alcohol talking, but they started ranting, without anyone asking, about how happy they were to be blessed with 2 daughters. Yet how sad they were that the younger one had decided to become so cold and distant with them. They said my emotional distance really hurt them. Especially because my sister Chelsea had always been so close and affectionate. They went on about how they wished both their daughters would love them. How much it hurt that I treated them so coldly. When, according to them, all they had ever done was love and care for me unconditionally. Listen, I was deeply offended by that speech. It was long, melodramatic, and full of lies. I'll admit, yes, I am cold and distant with them. But I have good reason for it. My distance didn't come from nowhere. And my parents lied when they said they loved and cared for me unconditionally. If I'm honest, I can't remember a single time in my life when I actually felt loved by them. Loved by other relatives? Sure. Loved by my parents? Absolutely not. Call me dramatic or whatever you want, but that's how it's always been. They love Chelsea. Not that it keeps me up at night. But the lie wasn't necessary either. I thought my sister gave them all the love I didn't. Which is why they adored her so much and had nothing left for me. Most of the time, they just left me to my own devices. While my sister was spoiled beyond imagination. If Chelsea were a balloon inflated with affection, she would have burst long ago. Or at least floated my parents' house away like in that movie. She got everything she wanted. And my parents even paid for her college twice. Since she dropped out the first time. They always said I was a horrible daughter with an attitude. While my sister was the perfect little angel. Sure, whatever they say. Because I never really bonded with my parents. I basically had to make it on my own. With help from other people. People I'm not cold toward, by the way. Now I have a job that my parents would probably consider good. Or rather, they'd say my salary is good. It wasn't easy, and I worked hard to get here, but I made it. My parents ignored me when I left home at 18. And only got back in touch after I landed my job. Then, they started complaining about money. Saying things were bad because of all the loans they'd taken out for us. I don't know why they said for us. When clearly most of that debt was for Chelsea. I'd say at least 80% of it. Anyway, Chelsea did eventually get a decent job after her second round of college. But she quickly moved on with her life. And told our parents not to expect any financial help from her. She wasn't direct about it. But her message was clear. I don't care that you spent so much money on me. But I'm not giving you a cent of my paycheck. My parents and Chelsea rarely talk or see each other. So now they're struggling and sad that neither of their daughters seems to care about them anymore. That's their narrative, anyway. But at the party, they pretended that Chelsea was their lovely, devoted daughter. While I was the cold, rude one who didn't care about her parents. For God's sake, Chelsea has basically given them the biggest screw you of their lives. And yet she still put on her loving daughter act for everyone to see. She didn't deserve that image, but of course, she was going to milk it for all it was worth. She even got jealous when my parents tried to talk to me or include me in the celebration. But since they were lying through their teeth and making up stories, I decided to correct their little speech. And remind them of how things really are. Maybe it was the alcohol, maybe their age. But they were clearly having some memory lapses. So as the good daughter, I thought I'd help refresh their memory. My response to their delusional speech was basically this. They shouldn't expect any return from me when they've invested all their love, care, and attention in Chelsea. I told them. I once invested money in a company called Banana instead of Apple, and I lost everything. So it's good to know that when you invest, you can lose it all. No, that company doesn't exist. But I wanted to give them a good example. It's not my fault that Chelsea has practically abandoned them. And they should be grateful that at least she didn't rob them or something worse. I also said it was ridiculous for them to expect me to have an emotional bond with them when they've always acted like a family of three right in front of me. More things were said, too many to fit here. But my mom started yelling that I was being cruel, saying they only brought it up because they wanted me to realize my mistake and be more present in their lives. My dad basically started crying. Apparently something he never does. Another lie. Saying that seeing a daughter act like this had brought him to tears. My sister rushed over to comfort them, hugging them, so everyone could see what a humble, loving, devoted daughter she was. I'd already said what I needed to say. I'd hit my alcohol limit and wasn't going to drink more, so I left. It's been more than 24 hours. And I thought my parents would have calmed down by now. No such luck. Now my parents and sister are blowing up my phone, saying the only way I can fix this is by starting to financially help my parents. At this point, I think they're not just stupid. They planned this whole thing as an ambush to guilt trip and blackmail me. But then I think they're even dumber. How could they possibly expect me to actually fall for that, right? It's clear that my parents want me to help them financially. But it's also clear to me that my sister wants our parents to keep paying off her student loans. Because otherwise, she'd have to pay them herself. Just like I did. My parents contributed a little. But it was far too little compared to the debts my sister racked up. Edit. Okay, I've been getting too many comments to keep up with. So I'll stop replying to each one directly. I'm sorry to have to do this. I'm not trying to avoid your questions, I promise. I'm just adding this edit to include some more details, so I don't have to go one by one. The question I've been asked the most is about the student loans. We both took out loans to study. The difference between those loans was about 80% to 20%. My debt was smaller because I chose to work while studying. But not just that, out of that 20%, I managed to pay off most of it with my own work. Those percentages aren't exact, but I don't think they're far off. Even if it were 75% and 25%, that wouldn't make it any better for my sister. Another big point of confusion. Did I pay for my parents' anniversary party? No, I didn't. I have no idea where they got the money. And honestly, I don't care. My only mistake was attending it, I'll admit that. But even if I could go back and do things differently, I'd still have gone. I think it gave me the chance to speak my truth, while they were right there in front of me. If I hadn't gone, that whole speech would have come from my parents anyway. At least I had the chance to say some things to their faces. Among those things, I asked if I was the child of an affair. Because I honestly can't understand how they can hate me so much. No, it's not that I actually believe that. But I'd be lying if I said I'd never wondered why they love my sister so much and me so little. I also told them that for the cheap alcohol they'd bought, it wasn't even worth being there. And you know what? I saw people among the guests smirking. They must have thought the same thing. If they'd bought decent alcohol, maybe it would have been easier to put up with their nonsense. The hangover from the boxed wine the next morning was worse than all the nonsense from that party combined. I wasn't expecting a $300 bottle. But if you're buying it by the gallon, you might as well buy fuel and serve it with a cocktail umbrella. Update 1. Before I begin, I should probably mention something I left out, because I didn't think it was relevant. I'm slightly on the spectrum. Yeah, I probably should have said that earlier. But there's so much stigma around neurodivergence. that I don't like telling people openly. It's not that important. So I thought no one would even notice. But someone commented that maybe I had some condition. That made my parents see me as less. And suddenly everything clicked. Looking back, I think that's why my parents were so harsh with me. And basically worshipped my sister as the perfect daughter. I'll admit I was a bit hard to handle as a kid. But I just wish my parents had taken me to the doctor. Instead of assuming I did certain things on purpose. I wasn't a tantrum-throwing child or anything. I was just a bit slow to understand certain things. Honestly, I think my first post already showed how unclear my thinking can sometimes be. My parents only took me for an evaluation when I was 14. And even then, I never developed the comprehension skills they thought everyone should have easily. They had me evaluated but never followed up. And of course, I couldn't take myself to a psychiatrist, I was a minor. I know because I actually tried. Anyway, my parents gave up, and so did I. It became my normal, and I accepted it. But I snapped when they discredited me openly for being cold. Without even mentioning what made me that way. That was really low. Either way, I let go and said some truly awful things that day. Normally, I freeze up. But that day, I didn't. Maybe it was the alcohol. I don't know. Or maybe it was the fact that I've been working on this with a professional for a while now. Since I can finally afford therapy. Now I have more tools to face things. Whether it was therapy or alcohol that helped me, who knows? What matters is that I finally did it. Instead of staying silent and not knowing what to do or say. Because of my lack of social skills. I just wanted to write this as a kind of update to my story. Because I realized it was necessary. Maybe now people will understand what I've been through. Or maybe not. And they'll be like my parents. Thinking that all minds work the same way. Update 2. I never thought I'd keep coming back here. To pour my feelings out to strangers. It's funny, I barely talk to people in real life. But here, I'm quite talkative. Someone from work found my post and came straight up to me, asking if it was me. I mean, his parents had been at the anniversary party. And probably told him what happened. So he figured it out. Honestly, we had a good laugh about it. There wasn't any awkwardness. He said he's on my side. And that my parents totally deserved it. Also, I met with my grandparents. And decided to have a little talk with them. They'd been staying at my uncle's house. Because they'd planned to spend the winter here. Where they live, it gets very cold. But our city stays moderately warm even in winter. I'll say this, I'm lucky my grandparents are around and available right now. I don't know if I'd have had the courage to call them and tell them everything if they were living far away. So today, I have to thank God that I didn't have to take the first step. They were already close. They're wonderful people, kind and loving. They'd been more affectionate with me than either of my parents ever were. So I went to see them and talked to them. They asked why I'd had that outburst that day. Why I was blaming my parents for having favorites. It's not that they didn't believe me. They just wanted me to explain what was really going on. I told them everything. Including a lot more details. About what's been happening over the years. Things they'd missed because they lived in another city. My grandparents didn't like what they heard. In fact, they were furious. My uncle and his wife were also there. And his wife ended up crying when she heard everything that had been happening. But they weren't the only ones who got the shock of their lives. I did too. They told me that my parents had never shared my diagnosis with the family. Everyone had been urging my parents to get me evaluated since I was a child. They'd noticed my behavior and suspected I might be on the spectrum. My parents told them that I had already been evaluated. But that nothing was wrong with me. They said I was just a difficult child. That I acted out because I was rebellious and rude. Now it's confirmed, they were always ashamed of me being different. My grandparents, especially, had tried to follow up with my parents. But they shut them down and told them not to force a diagnosis on me. But all of this was news to me. The worst part? I had an aunt who was severely autistic and died before I was born. I'd seen photos of her and knew she had passed away. But I never knew she'd been autistic or anything like that. In short, the conversation was exhausting for everyone. We had a few more talks about the topic. And my grandparents promised to confront my parents and tell them to go to hell. I think there was more information to share. But I was getting overwhelmed. So they suggested we talk again another day. Since my grandparents have a lot of experience caring for someone on the spectrum, they were very mindful of my needs and limits. I think it was the first time in my life that I truly felt someone in my family understood me and genuinely cared about me, even if they can't make my parents back off. I'm glad they promised to try to help. I may have money and independence now, but sometimes it's hard to navigate life without someone to guide you. No, I'm not bothered by being alone or anything. But it's comforting to have people nearby I can trust. My grandparents will eventually go back home. But my uncle and his wife will stay here. At least I have that on my side. Nothing is really resolved yet, of course. But I've found something positive in my life. Update 3. After meeting with my grandparents, they decided to confront my parents the next day. My uncle went with them too. I wasn't there. But they gave me a summary of what happened. My grandparents were absolutely furious with my parents for what they'd done. And they exchanged some very harsh words. My parents, of course, defended themselves, saying that I was the problem, not them. There was an argument about why they hadn't taken my diagnosis seriously afterward. They said they thought it was pointless, that I would probably end up mentally disabled and dependent on them anyway. They were convinced I'd share the same fate as my aunt who had died. And they simply didn't want to deal with all that. Yes, they are incredibly ignorant. And it seems they've never even tried to understand neurodivergence. They were afraid that if they got more involved in my diagnosis, they'd realize I would depend on them completely. And since they didn't want me tied to them for the rest of their lives, they chose to neglect me and ignore my diagnosis, hoping I'd eventually start believing I was normal. I may be on the spectrum, but even I can see how twisted that logic is. They didn't want me dependent on them. Yet they made my sister completely dependent on them. And now they want to depend on me. I'm speechless. Their plan was always to push me away, paint me as a problem child, so I'd leave them alone and keep my issues far from them. They had big expectations for their normal daughter, Chelsea. So they invested everything in her and gave her everything she wanted. Ironically, Chelsea ended up being the one tied to them, while I became independent and successful. My grandparents then asked why my parents were so bothered by my coldness and detachment, when that's exactly what they'd always wanted from me. Apparently, my mom and dad said that they had taken care of me, that it's not like they had abandoned me or put me up for adoption. Then they suddenly claimed that they'd been wrong about me, and that now that I was doing well in life, it wouldn't hurt to bring me back into theirs. My grandparents couldn't believe what they were hearing. I don't even know why my parents said that out loud. Maybe they thought my grandparents would understand, or that it somehow justified their actions. But I guess, deep down, they really did believe they had the right to love me less, because they thought I was damaged. But once I started making good money, everything else was conveniently forgotten, of course. Now my parents are angry with me because I told my grandparents everything. So I blocked them and my sister from my phone. Unfortunately, they've been contacting me from other numbers. And they're basically just a nuisance. They're not going to get a response from me. But I don't know when they'll stop. I've had enough. It's ruining my peace of mind and disrupting my life. I guess I'll have to change my number or something. Because I'm completely done with this. My grandparents and my uncles think that. After everything my parents have done and said, they also deserve to be cut off completely. And as for my grandparents, they said it's time to talk to their lawyer. To update the will. Removing my parents' and my sister's names from it. My sister hasn't done much recently. But whether by omission or complicity, she allowed all of this to happen for years. Even on the night of that party. Update 4. To everyone who's been kind and genuinely concerned for me, I have good news to share. For those who think I'm somehow broken because I'm on the spectrum, why are you still reading this? Some of you asked why I'm not friends with the guy whose parents were at the anniversary party. Since our parents are friends. Well, he's older than me. And I'm not exactly great at making friends. Which, I think, is pretty obvious. That's why we were basically strangers. Until we ended up working together. But don't worry, Eric and I are friends now. He told me that when he explained to his parents, with my permission, that I'm on the spectrum. They were furious at my parents. They took it very personally. And started telling everyone in their circle how awful my parents had been. Now, no one wants anything to do with them. My parents have been facing some really harsh criticism for their actions. And, of course, they blame me for it. My grandparents are still angry with them. And have demanded that they apologize to me. Publicly, if I allow it. But I won't allow it. I don't want it. And it doesn't matter anyway. Because my parents refuse to admit their mistakes. Chelsea, for her part, has been completely losing it. She's been trying to spread made-up stories about me online. But thankfully people have been reporting her posts. Since she's been using my condition to attack me. Her posts have been taken down pretty quickly. In fact, her account was suspended or deleted altogether. I'm not sure if it's temporary or permanent. I guess I was wrong about people and neurodiversity. It seems there really are a lot of educated, empathetic people out there. It's just my bad luck. That in my own life I mostly had to deal with the ignorant ones. It's crazy to realize how many neurodivergent people there are around me. And I never even knew. I don't really blame the stigma. This is a small town, full of closed-minded people. Luckily, I moved to the nearest city, where people are a little better. Unfortunately, my city is only 2 hours from my parents' town. So their harassment never fully stopped. They were furious when they realized they were being shunned and criticized by their friends too. When they saw that I'd blocked them, they tried to contact me from different numbers. But after a while I got so tired of it that I started seriously considering changing my number. It would have been messy, because my number is important for work. I talked to my uncle about it, and he advised me to warn my parents and sister that I'd press harassment charges if they didn't stop. He also planned to send a cease and desist letter if they kept it up. However, when I warned them about possible legal action, they suddenly changed their tone. The very next day, they left me a message begging me to talk to them one last time. I said no, because they don't deserve that from me anyway. But my uncle kept me updated on what's going on with them. Remember the debts they took on for my sister? Yeah, they've gotten out of control. Chelsea, of course, won't give them a single cent. So they've been desperate to reconcile with me and beg me to pay for them. Which, as we already knew, was their plan all along. The only difference now is that the interest on my sister's portion has mutated into some kind of monster. It's more than double what they originally borrowed. Anyway, it looks like they dug their own graves with that stupid plan. Now I refuse to speak to them. And my grandparents are going to disinherit them for their actions. My grandparents are still extremely angry at my parents. But here's the surprise. They told me later that they plan to leave me the shares that were originally meant for my parents and my sister, to compensate for what my parents never gave me. They said it was unfair that I had to take out loans for my education, while my sister got 2 college degrees for free. As for my parents, they're now in serious trouble because nobody is willing to help them. They, and a few commenters here, think none of this is their fault. But the rest of the family, their friends, and the vast majority of people here believe it's 110% their fault. What do I think? That it's not my debt. It's my parents' and my sister's debt. I might be on the spectrum, but I'm not stupid enough to pay for something that isn't my responsibility. Update 5. I think we now have a verdict on who's responsible for my parents' financial mess. Not that I didn't already know. But it's nice to have a judge put it in writing, so to speak. My sister's debts? Well, they belonged to her and my parents. All their signatures were on the papers they signed. The only problem is that my parents, out of their blind devotion to their golden daughter, wanted to honor those debts, while my sister, in her entitled glory, expected her parents, the same ones who spoiled her all her life, to pay them off for her. Well, the judge said that her creditors want their money now. This was more complicated than just student loans. My parents and my sister both had mortgages on their houses. My parents took theirs out to cover various expenses, and my sister because she didn't have money to buy her house outright. But among all those debts, someone finally said it's time to pay up. And nothing drives the point home like a foreclosure. The worst part is that this only covers the mortgages. They still have a huge chunk of student debt left, the kind that will follow them until the day they die. My autism will probably follow me until the day I die too. But I'll take that over thousands of dollars in debt that I know I'll never have to pay.